Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ankit Singh Tomar, and I practice as an oculoplasty and ocular oncology specialist in Ujjain, Madhya Pradesh. Thank you, Dr. Sumit, for letting me be a part of this course and for your kind words. Before I start, I would like to thank my mentors, Dr. Santosh Shanawar and Dr. Paul Finger, who have taught me everything that I know in ocular oncology. In this course, we'll be covering the salient clinical and imaging features of choroidal pigmented tumors, how to differentiate a suspicious nevus from melanoma, and a brief approach to management. Let's begin with the most common benign lesion of choroid, the choroidal nevus. It arises from choroidal melanocytes. It is often flat with ill-defined margins. Uh, it can be slate gray or pigmented, but some can be amelanotic as well. And common signs of chronicity include a presence of overlying drusen or a hypopigmented halo around its margin. As you can see that the size can extend from a small lesion to an extensive lesion, and some can be completely amelanotic. Let's address these pictures one by one. On the top left corner, we see a pigmented lesion about 2 disc diameter in size, which is nasal to disc. You can appreciate the irregular margins and the overlying white-yellow drusen deposits. And OCT section through it shows the bumpy hyperreflective layer, which is a drusenoid retinal pigment epithelial detachment. The image on the right upper corner is an autofluorescein image. I know that because the vessel appears dark. The bright white spots are the hyper autofluorescent spots, which are suggestive of lipofuscin skin or orange pigments, which are seen clinically. These are suggestive of abnormal metabolic activity on the surface of the nevus. We'll see more of similar pictures later. The right bottom picture is a fluorescein angiography picture in the late phase. It is grossly unremarkable except for some hyperfluorescent spots which signify microaneurysms which can be seen with nevi. So now what do I do with this kind of lesion if I see that in clinic? So it is essentially benign and hence a baseline documentation with clinical photograph and ultrasound is sufficient. These lesions do grow, though quite slowly, in about 30% cases. Do I need to worry about a growing nevus? Yes, because there's a risk of transformation to its malignant counterpart. Annual rate of malignant transformation is between 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 10,000 by different studies. And about 2 to 13% of these lesions do transform into malignant melanoma. How do we identify this specific subset of suspicious nevi, which are at a risk of malignant transformation? So I follow my mentor, Dr. Finger's mnemonic most, where M stands for melanoma, O for orange pigments, S for subretinal fluid, and T for tumor thickness more than 2 millimeters. Simple and easy to remember. Presence of these three features is highly suggestive of malignant transformation of the nevus. Other suspicious features include proximity to optic nerve and fovea, presence of symptoms in form of flashes, floaters, or loss of vision, and absence of drusen or hypopigmented halo. Let's tackle them one by one. So the first being orange pigments. As we discussed previously, these are suggestive of abnormal metabolic activity over the surface, and they are best seen on autofluorescence imaging. There are very few lesions which light up on autofluorescence, like drusen or optic disc astrocytic hamartoma. Hence, autofluorescence becomes an invaluable tool while examining a pigmented choroidal lesion and should be employed to follow up a lesion to monitor change. Even in change in the pattern of autofluorescence over time is suspicious, and we should make sure to have a discussion with patient and follow them up closely if that is observed. Any fluid, whether obvious subretinal fluid or subtle intraretinal fluid, is suggestive of abnormal leaky capillaries and hence metabolically active tumor. An OCT raster scan over the nevus surface with special attention to the inferior aspect of the lesion helps us catch even the smallest of these fluid pockets. The third aspect is thickness more than 2 millimeters. Ultrasound B scan is a great tool to measure thickness. On the left side, you can see that this is a very flat lesion. When we do an OCT scan over the same lesion, we see that the tumor is well delineated and there is a small fluid of pocket over it. Note the granular irregularities on the inner retina. These are dysmorphic photoreceptors suggestive of chronicity of the fluid. If all these three features, that is orange pigments, subretinal fluid, and tumor thickness more than 2 millimeters is present, then there is a very high chance of malignant transformation, and we should discuss the implications and management plans with the patient. However, if only 1 or 2 of these are present, ideally we should follow up the patient closely and look for any change. And if there is no change in 2 to 4 monthly follow-ups, then we can increase the follow-up to 6 months, but we should still keep a lookout for this patient's lesion. Now let's talk about the big bad lesion, that is uveal melanoma. Iris and ciliary body melanomas form a small proportion of all cases. Choroidal melanoma is a disease of middle age and elderly. Having said that, we do see some young people who can get this rare tumor. They tend to have a better prognosis due to better systemic immunity, which also fights the metastatic lesions. Racially, this disease is seen more commonly in Caucasians, and there is a higher risk of melanoma in patients with nevus of aorta and neurofibromatosis 1. Uveal melanoma is primarily a clinical diagnosis. So careful indirect ophthalmoscopy is a must. These lesions can be large and pigmented or sometimes even amelanotic. In the right side image, the inferior lesion is just a pigmented retinal scar, whereas the actual tumor is parafoveal and a little amelanotic. Ultrasound can help us get an accurate tumor height and basal dimensions, which help us plan the tumor management. And sometimes it can acquire a classical mushroom or cholesterol appearance after it has breached the internal limiting membrane of retina. Sometimes it can have accompanying exudative retinal detachment, as you can see in this image, and the shifting fluid. To describe this ultrasound video, it's a dome-shaped choroidal lesion with low to moderate internal reflectivity. You can see that there is an adjacent exudative detachment, and we cannot observe any extrascleral extension. If you notice closely, there is some amount of twinkling which is seen in the matter of the tumor, which is suggestive of tumor internal vascularity. In few cases, we can sometimes see the classical double circulation pattern with fluorescein angiography. Here, the dye lights up the overlying larger retinal vessels as well as the internal network of tumor vessels. We do not need fluorescein angiography for diagnosing uveal melanoma, but it can aid in suspicious cases or to differentiate it from other lesions, say, for instance, hemangioma. While we talk about the management of choroidal melanoma, I need to address the collaborative ocular melanoma study, which is a large multi-center study and is an excellent example across medicine as to how to study rare disorders. Here they enrolled nearly 2,500 patients in the 1980s in America and Canada across 43 centers. 3 tumor classes were defined based on tumor height and basal dimension. The small melanomas were observed, medium size were randomized between enucleation and plaque brachytherapy, and the large tumors had enucleation with or without irradiation. In the small melanoma group, they found that on observation, 1/3 grew over 5 years and 2/3 did not change at all. The risk factors for growth were presence of orange pigment, more than 2 millimeters of thickness, and more than 12 millimeters of basal dimension. Melanoma-specific mortality was found to be 1% over 5 years. In the medium-sized melanoma group, where there were around 1,300 patients, they found that either of the treatment did not offer survival advantage over the other. In other words, whether you enucleate or use radiation, the patient had similar chances of getting metastasis. The larger size group also found no survival difference between two arms. To conclude, small melanomas have a small risk of metastasis in 5 years if untreated, that was around 1%. Radiation is equivalent to enucleation in terms of metastatic risk, and enucleation did not worsen the risk of metastasis. But like I said, this study was conducted in the 1980s and some time has passed since this study. So what does the current medical evidence suggest? So we believe that treatment modality has no role in prognosis of uveal melanoma, and it is the genetic profile of the tumor which decides the risk of metastasis. So our main aim is to treat the tumor. But there's one more unanswered question. When does the tumor start metastasizing? For instance, if a patient has a small tumor and wants to delay the treatment. A study was done on the same topic, and they found that metastasis was detected on an average 2.2 years after the primary diagnosis. And these deposits developed from micrometastasis, which had happened when the tumor was much smaller. How smaller, you ask? About 7 cubic millimeter, which is nearly 3 millimeters basal diameter and 1.5 millimeter height. So this finding concludes that if we find a melanoma, we should not delay treatment irrespective of the size to reduce the risk of metastasis. I'll be covering iris melanomas and ciliary body melanomas in brief. Iris melanomas have a relatively better prognosis and are detected earlier than choroidal melanomas. They can be circumscribed or diffuse. They are more commonly seen in the inferior iris. And it is very important to look for neovascularization of the iris and ectropia on uvea. As you can see in the fluorescein picture, the tumor vessels are very leaky. It can also result in microhyphema. Gonioscopy is a must because it can help us look for tumor deposits, neovascularization of the angle, and pigment dispersion. These lesions can be managed with plaque brachytherapy, local excision, or in diffuse cases, enucleation. We recently described a new technique of total anterior segment plaque brachytherapy for diffuse iris melanomas. Here we used a custom 20 millimeter large plaque, which was placed over the amniotic graft covered cornea to irradiate the entire anterior segment. It had excellent local control with no corneal side effects. Ciliary body tumors, due to their unique location, may remain undetected and can acquire large dimensions before diagnosis. Due to proximity to vortex veins, they have a higher risk of metastasis. Prominent episcleral vessels can be seen in the quadrant of the tumor, and they can be managed with enucleation or plaque brachytherapy. To summarize, a suspicious choroidal lesion can be identified by the presence of the mnemonic MOST, simple and easy to remember, where M is for melanoma, O for presence of orange pigments, S for subretinal fluid, and T for thickness more than 2 millimeters. These lesions are slow growing, and hence serial documentation can help us in detecting subtle changes. Thank you for your patient listening, and thank you, Dr. Sumit, for this opportunity.